Richard Squires is the founder of the Museum of Temporary Art and the Delphi Film Foundation and co-creator of Soft Gallery. He has acted with La Mama Amsterdam, the Players Theatre of New England, Brecht West, and other theaters. 4 of his plays have been produced, including the musical The Fall of Albion, and he has written and directed 3 films, including the feature Crazy Like a Fox. His essays on theater and history have been published in The Guardian, The Washington Post, Performance Magazine, Gnosis, Society, Alternatives, Theatrales, and other publications. He lives in Washington, D.C. and New York City. Rogelio Maxwell is an interdisciplinary artist who moved to D.C. in the early 1970s after a brief stint in the School of Visual Arts in New York City. Since that time, Rogelio has continued his work in painting, photography, video and film, music, and performance art. His current work includes a series of digital artworks and performances, and he regaled me with tales of how he not founded but found hard art in '76. So I'm really excited to hear about that. Claudia Joseph teaches and practices whole systems ecological design. She created a colonially referenced interactive landscape at the historic Old Stone House of Brooklyn over the course of 14 years. She is currently developing Tilson Arts and Ecology Center in Mid-Hudson Valley, New York, as the director of New York Permaculture Exchange as a response to climate change and a model and incubator for creative solutions. From 1981 through 1988, she was the programming director for film, poetry, music, and performance art at DC Space. Cynthia Connolly is a photographer, curator, letterpress printer, and artist who lives in Arlington, Virginia. She graduated from both the Corcoran College of Art and Design and Auburn University's Rural Studio, worked for Discord Records, and booked an avant-garde performance venue, DC Space. In 1988, she published Banned in DC, Photos and Anecdotes from the DC Punk Underground, 79 through 86, through her independent press, Sundog Propaganda. An internationally shown and prolific artist, her photographic work, postcards, and books were exhibited in Beautiful Losers in the United States and Europe from 2004 to 2009, establishing her as a pioneer of DIY culture. Reviewed internationally, her photography is in many private collections, as well as the J. Paul Getty Museum, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, Smithsonian Museum of American History, and the Corcoran Gallery of Art. As Special Projects Curator for Arlington, Virginia, she launched the Arlington Art Truck with a National Endowment for the Arts grant in 2018. And she has been curator for Arlington County, Virginia for 15 years and continues to search the world both as curator and artist to connect disparate places, people, and things. The last person I'll speak about is the first person you'll hear from. Silvana Straw is a writer, performer, and cultural organizer. Her solo performances have been commissioned by the Washington Performing Arts Society and Dance Place. She has performed throughout the US, including Gala Theater in DC, Galleria de la Raza, San Francisco, Nuyorican Poets Cafe, New York, and the Art Institute of Chicago. A veteran of the DC poetry performance scene, she is DC's original slam champion. Silvana has been instrumental in building the DC poetry and spoken word and slam scene over the past 35 years. She founded and produced numerous events and series, including the first ever spoken word shows at the Kennedy Center and Smithsonian. She's been cultural organizer for Out Loud, an exchange project with DC and Nuyorican poets. She's the co-founder and producer of Midnight to Dawn series at DC Arts Center and the Poetry Bonanza series at the Black Cat. She served as a coach and instructor for the first DC Youth Slam teams for DC Writer Corps. She is a recipient of the Larry Neal Writers Award from the DC Commission of the Arts and the Women Writers Award from Judith's Room. Her work has appeared in the Huffington Post, Gargoyle, and the Library of Congress, The Poet and the Poem. In 2014, she produced The Ghosts of DC Past, featuring spoken word slam pioneers from the 80s and 90s. Please welcome Silvana.
I am the ghost of DC past. I am the ghost of DC past. I am the ghost of DC past. Are there any other ghosts here? I think I see some ghosties. Ghosts. Space is still the place. We are still in space. Hello. I'm so happy I'm seeing all these faces. It's like when you die, is this what it's like? Like you see all your favorite people. Oh my God. What an honor, and to be here to celebrate DC Space. And Bill Worrell, raise your hand. Thank you, Bill Worrell, for the gift of DC Space to each of us individually, to the city, and to the world, for all the artists that came through there. Thank you, Ray Barker, for caring and all your incredible work. And thank you, National Gallery, for opening your doors, and Terrence. So my first performance was at DC Space when I was 19 years old. In 1983, I had to audition for this group called Sabotage Poets, which was just cracking me up. Oh my God. I auditioned for Brian Tate and Jared Hendrickson on a bench outside of Mary Graydon Center on the American University campus, and I was kind of like a Euro back then and hanging out at Cagney's, and I showed up in my little Euro outfit with my poetry, and they're like, "You're in, just change the look." So, our first show was 1983, I'm 19, I've never been downtown before. Jared's this punky. He smears his face with ashes to get that dead boy look. Right, and it's our first show, we're all like sitting on stage together in chairs, which was really weird. And Jared's like writhing on the floor with the microphone. I'm the pin man, I'm your pain man. Sharp, not meant facetiously. Words to burn, incendiary. I'm your hellmate, your cellmate, your neighbor in labor, giving birth to the earth. I'm the pin man, you're dead. I think he was 20, maybe 21. Brian Tate is a silk-tongued scarecrow with a necklace of keys who goes subatomic by the waterfall. Now Josephine has fallen with the thieves, and I'm the one that made it happen. I broke the laws of nature, and the river turned to paper. I'm the one that made it happen. I threw us both a curveball, and I don't remember the rest. I'm sorry, Brian, but that was pretty good. Our next show is 2 doors down for the 9:30, and there was some kind of abandoned hotel which artists had taken over. I can't remember the name of it. The Ritz. And there's a band on before us called Psychodrama. And this is the second time I'm downtown. And they're naked and decapitating chickens. And the 300-pound lead singer runs screaming past me. Did I say naked? Screaming past me onto the street, and this is my cue to go on. So, and I'm kind of shy back then, and I read my 19-year-old girl love poem in a sea of sawdust and chicken guts. Spade is the doorman at Space. Spade is like an urban pirate with dreads and tattoos, a carpenter's belt with hammers and tools. He never smiles on duty because he's lord of the underground, and you need to get past him to get in. Richard Hilliard Gaylord? The third, Mike? Is it the third? Richard Hilliard Gaylord is going to come and kill me in my sleep tonight. Is anywhere between 80 and 112. He wears a full-length fur coat, black beret, white longish hair, black turtleneck, and a big peace sign. He's a retired Army psychiatrist. We're all 20, and we can't really figure out why this old man wants to be hanging out with us, but we know one thing, he likes us a lot. Jared and I nickname him the Horny Skeleton. I'm afraid of the skeleton. There's much more that can't be said within these walls. So I'm scared of the skeleton, and every time I get up to do a poem, he likes to interrupt us, grab the mic, and lead the audience. He interrupts our performances and comes up, and he leads the audience in a hippie chant. Anybody remember? Am I the only one who remembers this? He also likes to recite his favorite poem called Slob, an original. Capital S, capital L. You can really sing along. Capital O, capital B. Slob. I did not shave today and shall not shave tomorrow. A slob is one who and shall not go away. I cannot read my poem because it's nasty and we're not a DC space. Everybody now. I want to hear it. Hands up in the air. Thank you so much. So, I'm going to do a little bit of from the past into the present. Ray, keep me on time. My mom is a small Italian woman who, for the past 2 years, ever since I got my first answering machine in 1987, has been leaving me apocalyptic voicemail messages, sometimes daily, advising me and warning me about all kinds of things like the antibiotic-resistant superbug, monkeys on planes, squirrels in the attic, you name it. Strawberry. Silvana, this is Mama. She always tells me who it is in case I don't know. Silvana, this is Mama. I just saw on the news, don't eat strawberry today. There is something strange. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Right now on Channel 7, 2020, they are showing about people who don't wash their hands or wear glove, an infection you get in hospital. Channel 7, 2020, you better watch right now. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Your apartment is a mess. I know you had the flu, but you haven't washed the kitchen floor in 1 month. If you don't wash the kitchen floor, you're going to get superbug. I thought your boyfriend was there taking care of you. Your boyfriend is a potato couch. He's a potato couch. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Did you see the news tonight about the man who smuggled the monkey onto the plane underneath his hat? And then the monkey came out from under the hat and some passengers saw it sitting on his ponytail? Well, you want to know why he had the monkey on his head? I tell you why. Because he was trying to divert attention from what he was smuggling up his beep. Get it? He put the monkey on his head because he didn't want them to find out what he was smuggling up his beep. That's what these people do, you know. Silvana, this is Mama. Do you know who is Chuck Brown? Chuck Brown is the godfather of go-go, and he's playing at the Arts Festival tomorrow. You think you know how to dance? Well, he can outdance you any day at 74. He's the one who used to do the song Busting Loose, which I used to do as a teenager, and I can still bust loose today. You come, and we go. Beep. Oh, my God. Ivana. There's some on my phone right now if you want to listen. She leaves them all the time after. Silvana, this is Mama. I hope you can hear me over the loud music. I'm at a rock concert in the park. I'm dancing around in the trees, in the bushes, in the grass by myself. What's the matter with these American people? Nobody is dancing. I'm dancing around. The Americans are looking. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Why didn't you take me to see the Mongolian throat singers at Rhizome the other night? You know, I have always been fascinated by that sound. Don't you remember me making guttural sounds when you were small? Don't you remember I'm the one who introduced you to the guttural sounds? Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Did you know that as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to access your entire vocabulary, to remember certain words? So you know all those things you want to write about that you've been talking about writing? You better write them right now, before it's too late. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. You want to know why you don't have any money? I tell you why you don't have any money, because you take taxi everywhere. You even take taxi to go to the bathroom. Beep. Silvana, this is Mama. Why aren't you answering the phone? Are you on the Facebook again? I told you to get rid of the Facebook. Are you looking at the faces, or are the faces looking at you? Beep. Okay. Very. I'm going to end with a love poem that I found that I wrote when I was, I don't know, whatever, 19, that I found in a box. I am writing you a poem, dear Kamani. It goes like this. Your face rises outside my window. I pull down the sky. The birds are electric. They land on my chest. I eat them one by one. Carry me. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Ivana. So just a note about the program structure itself. I've asked each of the presenters to speak about the relationship to each of their venues, where applicable, to describe the details of what led to the venue's founding, provide insights on how booking, programming, and exhibition decisions were made, and describe some of the more memorable activities that occurred there. Additionally, I asked each presenter to cull materials from their personal archives to assist in telling their story. The presenters appear in more or less chronological order of their respective time periods, with Richard going first, then Rogelio, and more traditional presentations. And then it'll be followed up by Claudia and myself speaking over there on the stage. And then at last, Cynthia Connolly and I will be in conversation. We'll open it up to Q&A after that. So I just ask that you keep an eye out for themes or people that connect and carry across all four of the sections today. And wanted to share a more personal note for anyone who was at the June 30th event. Andrew White, who performed there, suffered 2 strokes on September 2nd. I just felt I should share that. He is at MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital on Irving Street Northeast. I've seen him twice, and he wanted me to share that he didn't experience any pain. So please think about him today during today's proceedings. Thanks to the panelists and to all of you for attending, the NGA, Terrence and Allie for helping us. And finally, here's Richard Squires to tell us about founding MODA.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks to the National Gallery for hosting this. It's really something for all of us, I'm sure. I've been asked to talk about, the time is brief, so I'm going to scurry through this, but I've been asked to talk about the founding of the Museum of Temporary Art some 45 years ago in 1974. It's almost a half a century now. It's hard to believe. I was living at the time in the spring of 1974 in this building called Rhodes Tavern on the corner of 15th and F. Rhodes Tavern was the oldest commercial building in Washington, built in 1799, and it stood opposite the U.S. Treasury. And the southern windows had views of the Washington Monument. The western windows had views of the Treasury. And the door to Rhodes Tavern, which is over there in the corner, had stood open since 1968 until 1974. When I first discovered it while I was wandering around DC looking for a studio, I didn't have to find the landlord. I just opened the door and went upstairs. I ended up renting it for $50 a month. And shortly thereafter, I began working with my friend Marta Minuchin on a show at the Harold Rivkin Gallery called 200 Mattresses, or Soft Gallery, as the official name was said. And this gallery was a 25-foot square stone building from the 18th century with 20-foot ceilings. And Marta, who was an artist from Argentina and a kind of famous cultural anarchist, and I decided that the thing to do with the gallery would be to make an environment and soften it up. And we decided that the best way to do that would be to hang mattresses on the ceilings and the walls and pad the floor. The floor we ended up padding pretty much seven or eight mattresses thick. Kids really loved it, as you can see. This is me at age 25. I'm sure I'm unrecognizable. This guy is Chris Gardner, who is a somewhat famous. He helped me with that installation. And over on the right is Harold Rivkin, the owner of the gallery. We got these 200 mattresses from the Cairo Hotel, which had just been closed by the Board of Health for multiple infractions of the health code. I came in and told the owner, Maurice Arabi, that I would like to rent his mattresses for a month. And he looked me up, he sized me up, and he said, well, it'll be at least $2 a mattress per month. And I said, okay, that's a deal. And he was amenable to us renting all the mattresses in the hotel, and Ray particularly liked this shot. We just, instead of taking them down the staircase, we just threw them out the windows. And then threw them onto trucks and hauled them into Georgetown, where we invited about half a dozen artists from DC and half a dozen from New York, or maybe it was 8, to come for a night apiece and do either some sort of exhibition or performance. Now, a number of these artists, Juan Downey, Al Hansen, Ray Johnson, Charlotte Moorman, Carolee Schneemann, were members of a movement in New York called Fluxus, of which Marta was quite a part of. One of them had a friend at the National Gallery, and when the show was over, I think it was Carolee, approached me and said, you know, you should call my friend at the gallery and see if maybe they could give you a grant to make a catalog. And all of these photos are from that catalog. They gave me a grant, and knowing particularly from Alice Denny, who is in the audience tonight, which is wonderful to say, knowing that that the Redevelopment Land Agency was giving buildings away because they had just given Alice one for the Washington Project for the Arts, I thought, well, I'll just ask them if I could have a studio. And so I wrote them a letter, told them about my grant, and they wrote me back and said, well, sure, would you like to come and see what we have for you? And I said, yes, I'd love to see it. And that turned out to be 1206 G Street, which was not a studio at all. It was an entire building. This is the building here. There's the museum up there. It was a wig shop, an abandoned wig shop at the time, as most of the downtown was abandoned and desolated at that time. And I just took the sign off and put my own sign back on and turned it into, I had to think up a name, so I called it the Museum of Temporary Art. And I invited 4 friends to come in to take studios in the floor on separate floors of the building, because I had found myself in the situation at the age of 25 of having 2 buildings in Washington, D.C., downtown, for a combined rent of $50 a month. That's how it was in those days. Could they all come back? Once we were installed, we started doing whatever we liked to do. This picture here is showing one of the members of the board of directors painting being ground off of the sidewalk after the redevelopment land agency declared that this street painting, which Roger Metz had done with cans of paint and a broom, they said, no, that's not art. And we said, well, yeah, we think it's art. And they said, no, that's not art. And so they removed it. For my part, I was more kind of in the mental vein on all of this. And I started writing manifestos and declarations. One of them I started from this favorite quote of mine by Ezra Pound: religion is just another unsuccessful attempt to popularize art, and then went rambling on about art and religion, I'm sure totally inanely. And the other one, this one is interesting to me now because in 1974, scientists were in general agreement that we were not entering a period of global warming, but rather into a new ice age. And that made me wonder, well, what are we going to do with all the art? And if the glaciers are going to come and grind it all to dust, shouldn't we really think about making art as temporary as possible for now? Anyway, that's the kind of thing that we were doing. But suddenly things got serious for us. A friend of mine in New York, Rudy Brouillon at Tricontinental Film, had just received the Cuban government's film on the Bay of Pigs invasion. And in 1974, this was just 12 years after the invasion itself, he gave me permission to do the American premiere of that film at the Museum of Temporary Art, warning me that the city was full of right-wing Cubans who may pose a danger to us. He thought a real physical danger. And out of that came a really interesting, typically Washington story. I had a friend, Carl Colby, whose father at the time, William Colby, was the director of the CIA. And Carl worked in film, and he also lived at home. So I called Carl on the phone, but his father answered. And he asked me what I wanted Carl for, and I said, well, I'd like to talk to him about a movie project that I've got going on. But that was how we got the word to the CIA, hopefully to protect us from the people that we were supposed to be afraid of. The Pulitzer Prize-winning reviewer from the Post came and saw it, and he liked the film and produced a very nice review of it. And as part of his review down in the lower right, he also said something about our first art exhibition at the museum, which was Janet Schmuckel's scrawled Little Lulu drawings, not drawings, from a Little Lulu coloring book. She had scrawled with crayon on them. She'd taken them to the Corcoran Gallery of Art, presented them to an unjuried exhibition, and the Corcoran refused them, saying, that's not art. Well, she brought them over to us, and we gave her a one-man show. And Tom Shales sort of liked it. The next thing here is a show that he didn't like very much, Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, which were home movies 8mm movies that Henry Allen at the Post had gotten, I think, directly from Ken Kesey or for somebody in his circle, showing the merry pranksters, Kesey and Neil Cassidy and that whole crew, in their magic bus, driving around California in kind of an acid haze. That show also was quite successful. We had to add a midnight show because it was promoted by a DJ named Tom Curtis, who was angling for a feature in the style section, and Henry sort of held this out to him, and so Tom promoted it nonstop the entire time that we had the show. Well, anyway, the Redevelopment Land Agency took a dim view of all of our activities. They didn't think that what we were doing was art. And in February, they began sending us what became sort of monthly eviction notices. This was the first of them. My response to that was to put notices up. Now, remember, this is in the middle of Watergate. That RLA plus MOTA equals Moralta or La Morta. We put those up in the museum's windows, but again, RLA was not amused. In April, we had our first, and as it turned out, last April Fool's Ball. And here, I designed this invitation. Mota, of course, well, for those who don't know, mota is Spanish for slang for marijuana, so that's the smoke. Atom is mota spelled backwards, and pure idea is what you end up with after you've done with the atoms. Now, at that time, Alice knew that I'd been evicted from the museum, or was being evicted, and when I showed her one of the letters from the Redevelopment Land Agency, she burst into laughter and she said, "Richard, I think you found the perfect name for your gallery." Something that I've always remembered. But there was help in the wings. This was the last thing that we did in July of 75 rather, before Janet Schmuckel came back on the scene. Janet had stayed with the museum through our travails and found a legal aid attorney who made a deal with the Redevelopment Land Agency that the Museum of Temporary Art could continue as an institution, provided that the current board of directors resigned and vacated the building, and a new board led by Janet was to take over. And Janet did take over. She did a great job, had a long run. And I have to say, I'm sure I'm over time, but I have to say that one of my favorite shows that I've ever seen in Washington happened while Janet was running the show, which was Walter Hopps's 36 Hours show that filled the museum with the art of every hippie artist in DC. That's pretty much all I have to say. I always thought of the museum not as a gallery, not as a work project, but actually a work of art. And the art had something to do with cultural anarchy. And it was a real pleasure to run, and it's been a pleasure to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to say good afternoon to everyone. Shout out first. Thank you so much. Alice Denny is sitting in front. I'm so thrilled that she was able to make it down here. Please, a handout for Alice Denny. Of course, you know Alice founded the Washington Project for the Arts, and she also had the Jefferson Place Gallery and, of course, the Washington Modern Art Gallery. And Alice did so many great things, and it's really an honor to have her present. I'm going to start off right where Richard left off. So this is a picture of me in the Museum of Temporary Art. This is at the Larry Rocket Welch exhibit. This is a photo by Marty Menzel, one of my greatest and best friends. I've learned so much about photography from Marty. We founded a club called Shutter Madness back in the mid-'70s. And, well, we basically photographed all of the District of Columbia and so many other things. I have so many great memories of working with Marty. So as you know, the Museum of Temporary Art at this time was being run by Janet Schmuckel. Janet Schmuckel, I have to say, I personally believe was a genius. Janet, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but she has certainly left her mark, not only in Washington, but everywhere she went. She was a brilliant artist. She was primarily an artist who wrote as her medium. She was a writer, but Janet did so much more, and she had a profound effect on me and my development as an artist. I moved from New York City when I was in my early 20s. I was going to the School of Visual Arts, and I had grown up in Brooklyn, New York, and I just needed to get out of New York. True story, I just wandered into the Port Authority in Manhattan, went up to the ticket teller and asked, "Where is this line going?" And she said, "Washington, D.C." And I said, "I'd like a one-way ticket to Washington." And that's how I ended up here, and I'm really happy about that. I've been here ever since 1972 and continue to do my work and develop as an artist. But again, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Janet Schmuckel certainly opened my eyes up. When I came here, I was really just interested in direct observation, landscape, portraiture, and still life. That was what I thought I wanted to do. But Janet introduced me to the world of conceptualism, performance, installation art, and Eric Satie. This is a shot of Janet. I don't know if you can make her out. She's entering the museum right next to the rug store. That's the building in the center there. And that building is the Ritz, where Richard had mentioned earlier. We really just took over the building. There were paintings. We painted the floors, the walls. There were paintings everywhere. A wonderful show put on by Walter Hopps. Hope I'm not going through this too fast. This is a photo of Janet at Hard Art with one of her friends. I like this photo of Janet a lot. It really talks about her. Yeah. This is, Janet and I shared many studios from 1973 till 79, at which point Janet went on to work primarily at the Museum of Temporary Art. But this is our view from our 1608 Q Street. Remember, Richard had talked to you guys about the Cairo Hotel. So this is what it looked like when Janet and I occupied a second floor studio. So I thought I'd bring that, let you guys see this image. So this is probably right around the same time that Rick Squires and Soft Gallery would be doing that fantastic work. And by the way, Rich, I saw that Charlotte Moorman perform there with the ice cello. What a wonderful exhibit that was. So as I said, when I first came to Washington, my main goal was to pursue traditional arts, making the portrait. This is a portrait of Dr. Ted Fields, who was a dentist and artist. This was a commissioned work. This is a study for a portrait of Dr. Fields. But what I didn't know was that what was going to happen was that Janet and I would find the museum, the Hard Art Gallery. And we literally found it. One day, moving from our 1608 Q Street, we had been evicted from that studio space, and we needed a new space to work. And that night, I'll never forget the night before we found Hard Art. Well, let me go back a little bit. In 1974, I was working for the Wall Corporation as a draftsman, and myself and my friend Richard Sigmund, we were walking up 15th Street, and we walked by 1407 15th Street, and there was a sign on the building that said Hard Art Gallery. We walked in, and boy, we were blown away. As young artists, we were probably 22, 23 years old at the time, and we thought, man, check out this stuff in here. Just incredible, just, it's hard to describe it, but so you're looking in the gallery right now, and the walls were covered with gigantic trash bags. And there were black trash bags. Every wall had a gigantic trash bag, and we had never seen anything like this. It just seemed like, so forward thinking in terms of installation art. Anyway, we were really impressed. So we became fans of the gallery. We went to as many of the exhibits as we could. And at the time, Hard Art, this is 1974 now, you guys, Hard Art was probably the coolest art gallery in Washington. I mean, the guys that ran it, Dick Miner, Paul Bridgewater, and Michael Transu were cool. The crowd that they brought to the gallery were cool people. And, we were young artists. We thought, man, what a cool place to hang out. Little did I know, fast forward now from 74 to 1976, Janet and I are wondering, where are we going to get another studio? Where are we going to work? We're walking again, just by chance, up 15th Street. It's about, I guess it's about 10 o'clock at night. We had to be out of our 1608 Q Street the next morning, and we stopped in front of the building. It was dark. The sign was up. We knocked on the door. We knocked, and just before we left, we must have knocked for about 5 minutes. We heard somebody running down the steps. A guy opened the door. It turns out this guy's name was Raul. He had a little dog next to him. He had a heavy blanket around his shoulders. And we were like, whoa, what's going on in Hard Art? And he said, oh, they left. And I was like, what do you mean they left? And he said, well, the building is abandoned. Everybody's gone. And I'm just squatting here. Raul was literally, had found the place and had moved in. The place was freezing, you guys. I mean, really freezing. No lights, no gas, and dark. So Janet and I looked at each other and we thought, you could just see the wheels turning in our head. We thought, oh my God, we may have found Hard Art. So we quickly, we left, contacted the realtor, and set up a deal to start renting the building. There was a 3-story townhouse right at 15th Street between P and Rhode Island Avenue Northwest. And we thought, man, what a great concept. We'll just keep it as a gallery, invite all our friends to show their art, and just continue the tradition of great art, with one caveat. We would not recruit artists. Artists had to approach us, and that was the guideline we used. It didn't matter about the quality of the art. If you had enough confidence to approach us and say, I'd like a show here, that's all that was necessary. Our only other rule was that you not change the structure of the gallery architecturally. But as I was saying, so from that point on, Janet and I began having exhibits. We got about 8 of our closest artist friends, and together our rent, I think, monthly came up to something like $30 a month. We had the entire building. We had, I think, at one point we had about 10 artists. Carl Cephas is one of the artists that lived in the building at around that time. He had a band with Peter Muse and several other people. It was called Tony Perkins and the Psychotics. They were our house band. But as I was saying, I didn't realize at the time that this was a great opportunity for me to continue my work in the portrait. And so I used the space mostly to make portraits of artists that I knew, as well as to put on exhibits of other artists in the area. This is a portrait of Sherman Fleming, a well-known performance artist. Sherman has relocated. I believe now he lives in Philadelphia. I missed Sherman a lot. I learned a lot about performance art working with Sherman. We did a number of pieces together. And I'm sure he continues to do performance. This is one of my early portraits in the gallery. This is a portrait of a woman. This is a commissioned work. This woman's name is Rowan. And I'm getting near the end of my talk, folks. This is another portrait of Greg in the gallery. So all of these pictures, I didn't know at the time how valuable they were going to be. These were mostly where I would take people down into the main gallery off hours and do my studies for portraiture. But now they are looming to be very valuable pieces. Another shot of the gallery. I call this Christmas at Hard Art. It actually wasn't Christmas, but I was in there waiting for a client to come in, and I put the lights up, and it looked like Christmas, so that's the title of the work. And that's the south wall of the Hard Art Gallery. So Hard Art basically is two large rooms. As I said, we had the first floor, second floor, and at any given time, there would be artists in the building working in their various spaces. We also used the basement and the third floor. This is an opening of the Liz Gutekunst exhibit. That's Susan Mumford on the right. She was the lead singer for Tiny Desk Unit. And that's Claire Kearney of the Cancer Girls on the left. Claire was also a resident of Hard Art, and there were a number of bands that she was in, including the Pocketbooks from New York and the Cancer Girls. This is my view of the back of Hard Art. This is a very cold winter. I think it was like maybe 84, and we had gotten a real blast, and but I thought I'd throw that in. And this is what Hard Art looked like when about 6 months after we all vacated. So a quick story about what happened. The landlord approached us and said, listen, you guys have to go. I want that building back. And we thought, well, what can we do to stay? He said, nothing. You guys have to leave. It was really a heartbreak for me. And I don't think it would be a stretch to tell you guys that had we not been evicted, I'd still be in that building. That second floor was my studio. And I'd still be working, still inviting artists to make art and to continue to do all the things we did there. We had performance art, music of every kind, jazz, experimental music, new wave, punk. One of the biggest shows we had there was the Bad Brains show in 1979. The line literally went from, this is P Street to the left, Rhode Island Avenue is about a half a block away. The line to get into the building had gone around Rhode Island Avenue to see the Bad Brains. It was and Trenchmouth. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, they were there too. Thank you. Lucian Perkins came and photographed that show and won 2 Pulitzer Prizes for his photos of the Bad Brains at Hard Art. I really miss this space a lot, and as I said, if there's anybody in this audience who could help me get back to those glorious days of running an art gallery and having all this great sculpture. We did film. Ann Basson is in the audience. We had a little group called the Momentary Forum where I played cello and Ann danced. But we did everything, you guys. We had dance performances. We had photo shows, painting shows, of course, performances of every kind. And I think it's a lasting legacy to the Washington art scene. A couple more shots. This is another study of Rowan for portrait. I love that red. The light coming into that gallery was amazing, you guys. I mean, it was a photographer's dream. Another subject in the gallery. So the gallery would open, those 2 doors in behind the sitter would open into another room where we had installations. I think I can mention, do I have enough time to mention one more? 1 minute, okay. So in the room behind Leslie here, Robin Rose and Kevin McDonald, Michael Reedy, and Mark Clark put this terrific, they installed this terrific installation. Robin was in charge of putting barbed wire in the room. And by the time he was done, it was like a cobweb, a spider's cobweb, only it was made out of barbed wire. The floors were covered with huge pieces of broken glass. And there was a painting that the 4 of them had worked on, an oil painting, which was on the far end of the gallery. And Kevin McDonald put an installation in the back of the room. Now, the rule was, if you could get to the painting, and mind you, getting through that barbed wire was no joke, you guys. It was so thick, you would have to be insane to try to get through it. But at the back of the wall, there was this painting, this oil painting. And sure enough, one of the guests took his shirt off and crawled through the broken glass, got through the barbed wire. He was cut up, sliced up, blood was coming out of every part of him. But he got to the back and lifted the painting off the wall, held it up in the air, the room, everybody applauded, and he ended up with a valuable work of art. I think my talk, I think that's my last slide. Yeah. Oh, one more of Rowan, and that's another story. Notice that light again I was talking to you about. There's a picture by Liz Guttenkens on the wall. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out today. I'm telling a personal story of how I came to space and what I found there in 1978, 79. That I was going to school at American University. I met a woman named Julia Brooke. She said she had lived in England. Her father was in the diplomatic corps, and she had heard a lot of punk music. So she was feeding me information like, have you ever heard the Sex Pistols? How about Blondie? Ultravox, they're playing at this club called the Atlantis downtown. You really should come down. And she was in my graphic arts class, and these musicians had a real flair for art. Many of them were coming from the Corcoran School of Art. They were affiliated with different visual arts organizations. And I met the Urban Verbs. There was quite a buzz around them. Yeah, and there was this thing at WGTB happening at the same time. There was a radio station that played great new wave music, and they were right on the cutting edge, but the radio station got shut down. So David Howcroft and some other people started an organization called Washington Area Music Association. And on the back of this ticket was a questionnaire asking, what kind of music would you like to see in DC? What band should we bring? And this is one of the bands that came in the early years. So I met all of the people from the Urban Verbs. Julia took me over to Roddy France's house. He was living with Carol Blizzard, who later became Bill Worrell's wife. She was living with Roddy at that time near AU. They had a real thing going because Talking Heads were just hitting. And Roddy was Chris France's brother, the drummer. And Urban Verbs had a big buzz around town. They did lots of shows in weird places. Robin tells me they helped start the Atlantis Club. And their flyers were always really great. They worked with Bill Worrell at the Pension Building. I had a flyer from that. I have to say, I scanned, 100 things, and we pared them down to 20.
There's a lot of work,
It's a big story, so I'm going fast to try and tell it in 10 minutes. But, okay, so we had that, and then we had Tiny Desk Unit came on the scene. So I think I maybe had left AU, and I was living in Virginia again for a year, and I came in for the show in 1979. But there was DC Space. Bob was living with David Howcroft on Wisconsin Avenue. So I met Bob through David and the Verbs and that whole crowd. And he said, you really should check out DC Space. It's really cool. And I said, okay. And I went down there and I said, yeah, you're right. It is really cool. And Bob was living over Whitlow's. There was lots of empty spaces downtown, as Richard said, and Rahelia said, real estate was cheap, right? We could get in, we could get art space, we could have a scene. Bob told me, oh, there's a space over the Lincoln House. So that was around the corner. He was at 11th and E, and I was at 10th and E. So I think we paid $500 a month. We didn't get as good a deal as Richard and Rahelia. It was a five-room apartment, 3 bedrooms, and so that became my downtown headquarters. So that was 3 blocks from DC Space, and then right around the corner from 930 Club. This is walking up 11th Street towards Woody's, from 11th and E up to 11 and F. And that was a condition of the neighborhood at the time. And there were mostly like greasy fast food places and wig shops and abandoned buildings and shoe stores, lots of shoe stores for some reason. So, and Garfinkel's was there too. We had good clothing stores, but really not a whole lot else going on. I was catty corner to the FBI and across the street from Ford's Theater, 2 doors down from the house where Lincoln died. So there were tourists all over the place all day long. And then at night, it just completely emptied out, except for the porn shops, and nobody was around. But there were great things happening at District Curators. And after a while, Bob told me there was a job opening there, that it was a weird grant opportunity that Bill had gotten because NEA was much kinder to the arts in that era. There were all kinds of grants available, Meet the Composer and different grants I remember we got. And that the arts were thriving in DC because they had support. So Bill had gotten a grant. There was like an open call. We had to go to a room with lots of people milling about. I had to be under 23 years old, have lived in DC for a year, and made less than $3,000 the previous year to be eligible for the grant, and I was, and I got it, and I started working for Bill, and he was doing all these cool jazz shows, and we went on to do the most amazing shows of my life, that we did every great jazz saxophonist. I remember seeing Anthony Braxton really early in the upstairs of DC Space playing every saxophone. I remember Sun Ra. I remember all kinds of wonderful jazz. I often sat at the counter and sold jazz tickets. My job with Bill was graphics. I came in as a graphics and office person, and we produced big things. They were little when we started. We were the first to do Laurie Anderson and Philip Glass in DC. We did things like King Sunny a Day, Black Sheep were at the Pension Building. We did New Music America in 1983, which was a fabulous, all over the place event that it was impossible that 2 of us ran that, but somehow we did. This was the lineup in 1982 when I was first working there. It was just an amazing array of people. I got to have lunch with John Cage. You know, he had squash soup with me at DC Space, and we chatted, and he was lovely. And Pauline Oliveros came on that series, and I met Rogelio, and I started mixing it up at Hard Arts and other
Oh, that
venues.
shirt. That's a nice shirt, Rogelio.
Yes, that we had all kinds of different music. We had world music when people didn't really even recognize what world music was. And we mixed it up with our local poets and performers and bigger names. And often people who came who were famous gave workshops and really gifted the community with their presence. But I did graphics promotion, and sometimes I performed in the shows, sometimes I booked the films, sometimes Bill did. IMI came in, and they became regulars at DC Space, and we did a lot of politically conscious material, both in our benefits and in the content of the theater performances, or the speakers that we had there. We had amazing, amazing poetry, lots and lots and lots of it.
This will be my one interruption. I'm going to ask Cynthia this question. Can you put in, I know we're short on time, but a good place to pause. Was there a specific sort of aesthetic that you were looking for, or was it wide open? Was this like,
okay.
are we seeing indications of what you liked?
Yeah, I
Or,
forgot about the conversation part.
but I mean,
So yes, when I started, Bill and I had big desks in the big room in the Atlantic building, and we'd sit across, and he'd play a tape and we'd talk, or I'd play a tape and he'd tell me it's the worst thing he ever heard, and then I'd go ahead and book it, But that we kind of collaborated at the beginning, and I picked up a lot of the regular acts that he used because they were always good for space, and they continued to be. And we had our roster of neighborhood musicians and artists. And then we got lots and lots of solicitations, packages, and we'd pull out whatever looked authentic and really from the heart. That was the main thrust. It wasn't a genre issue for me. And we drew from many areas, from Baltimore, Richmond, Charlottesville, all around the DC area, Fredericksburg, Maryland, lots of Maryland people came in just to be in the city at a venue where people really cared about the arts, that nothing like that existed in their neighborhood, and they really loved coming down to see us. So
Thank you.
I would say it was, whoever was really speaking from the heart, that's who I paid attention to. A good variety of things. Okay. And then we did new music in the afternoon, and they're all our friends. Danny Frankel from the Urban Verbs, Robin Rose from the Urban Verbs, still coming through many years later. Everybody transformed out of rock and roll into new music in some ways.
This is your work, right? You made this.
That's my graphics, yeah. So we had a giant camera that had a room of its own when we were at District Curators. And I worked there till 1985, and then the office moved to my home. District Curators got so big that they started, being an entity of their own and not being merged as much with DC Space. Although we had done Ad Arts in 1984 and 85, those were totally big public projects that ran out of the curator's office, and Space was still housed there. So it was really interesting. And then, the Verbs and Tiny Desk Unit crowd, I won't say they aged out, but the next thing came along. And there were other art bands, and I'm going to get in big trouble here because there were so many fabulous bands, and I can't name them all. And I'm looking at Charlie Steck, who is in Velvet Monkeys, and Carl, who is in the Psychotics, and I know, and Alex in the back with Ignition. There was just like too many great bands to name them. But I put up 9353 because they were the only band that played 5 nights in a row at DC Space and filled the house every night. Okay? I was in the parking lot making sure the fights didn't get too big. Okay? Because they drew a contentious crowd. There was a lot of volatility around their shows, but we were not afraid to go there. We went to the edge. We, did Press Mob. We did Parasite. We did thrash shows. We did things that I had to come down and personally monitor because, yes, there would literally be holes in the wall after some of the shows, not 9353, but, broken chairs. The space really tolerated a lot from us. And upstairs was Olshansky Gallery, gave the place some glamour and a whole other layer of art that happened. Of course, there was a lot of visual art all the time on the walls. Here we are, 10th anniversary. Okay, this is when I'm going out. You'll notice the station to the right. We had rice and beans and soup of the day every day for artists who needed it. Okay, I never saw anyone come in and not get served food who was hungry. It was a miracle that Susan Worrell, who, came in, she was a high school principal, Bill's mom, and came in after I started working, came into Space and started running it, and was the most wonderful, kindest, most generous person I've ever met. She understood the mind of troubled genius youth, that we needed a playground, that these people were incredibly bright, but they didn't fit in necessarily to other segments of society, and they had things to say. And she was way too tolerant and let us say whatever we needed to. She was amazing in her leniency and her love of art, and passed that on to everyone around her, and really gave us a huge gift of the opportunity. And I have to mention the food too, and Ray Melrose there, that if we had leftover food, it went to the pantry, to the homeless food shelter where people could use it, that there was a consciousness in the space about love of all people and inclusion, and is why I still consider it my family. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia.
I can't, it's impossible to follow Claudia and what she just said, but I totally agree with everything she just said. So Claudia, I have followed in Claudia's footsteps in booking DC Space. She called Ian Mackay, I think, and said, who can replace me? Is that, no, that's not the story. Anyway, I ended up working at DC Space and working with Claudia and learning her tricks on how she booked bands at DC Space. And Claudia and I spent quite a long time on the phone about 2 weeks ago trying to figure out how that happened exactly. But she had her office in her apartment that you saw on 10th Street across the street from Ford's Theater. And I would go over there and I would hang out with her and she would tell me how she booked DC Space. And that went on. I literally went into my taxes to see how many weeks I worked at DC Space in 1987. I can't remember. Did we say 36 weeks? Yeah. So at some point we couldn't figure it all out. And basically I hung out with her. She taught me how to book DC Space. And then she finally left. She left in '88. She needed to make a tear and do something else in her life. And I took the reins. And what I saw in DC Space, I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1981 from Los Angeles, and I was involved in the punk scene in Los Angeles and then involved in the DC punk scene and was a rock import buyer and indie buyer at Olson's Books and Records. So that was sort of my music experience and performance experience. And then I went to the 930 Club a lot that was up the street at 930 F Street. And, all my friends were musicians. That was my credentials for booking DC Space. So I just found this is the typewritten sheet. We got a new phone system at DC Space, I think, at some point. So we had these extensions with the intercom, which was really fancy. And I just thought it was kind of a cool listing. And I know that I wrote this up. There's my phone number, which is actually still the Discord Records phone number where I lived in Arlington. That some number still works. And you can see some of the other people on here at that time, which was probably 1988 or 1989. So it's kind of cool to look at that. I was just going to flip through a bunch of calendars. We'll see some of the calendars, which I noticed there were other venues that did this sort of format. And I think that Claudia and Bill really started the calendar, this look, or Claudia did. If you want to clear, you can interject at any point, Claudia. But I just thought it would be fun to look at them, and this is in chronological order. But one of the things that Claudia did teach me, what she just said, was the who you booked and what you did was if you really felt that they were authentic. And one of the things I would do is, so this is 88, and by then we moved the DC Space office into 7th and E Northwest on the second floor. And I took an old diner table and a chair, and then I kind of created these shelves holding all these cassette tapes. This is drawn definitely by Claudia, right? Right. Yeah. Claudia drew this. You can see that's her writing. It's kind of fun to see. That's me trying to copy her style. Terrible. I'm not good at this. And then, and there's me trying to copy her style. There's Claudia. So it goes back and forth. There's Claudia's writing on this one. And then another one of Claudia's, 1988, and this could be the last one she did. And then that canceled stamp I had made up the street at that Baumgarten rubber stamp company that I loved. Baumgarten. I made 1 billion stamps there because so many bands would cancel, and then we'd sit in the meetings on Wednesdays and handwrite canceled or whatever. It's like, we just need a stamp. There's one crossed off, the connotations crossed off. One of the things that when I started booking DC Space, and I remember thinking, this place is so amazing. How does it even exist? And I remember the time that it hit me was when I was walking downstairs to the bathroom downstairs to the bathroom near the bar. And it's so precarious. And there was that handrail that was like, I remember the handrail was like this wrought iron thing that was handmade to fit that weird curve going down. And then you go into that little, it was literally a room with a toilet and that little window that you didn't know where it went. And I just sat there I remember sitting on the toilet going, this is amazing. I just can't believe I have this job, that I work here. This bathroom is amazing. Where else can you go to the bathroom at a place like this? It's so disgusting, And it was so great because it was real, It was a real place. And things were falling apart, things were breaking. And part of it was like this for me was seeing all these people wanting a place like this, and they needed the space for this expression. And then how do you keep it going? And when you have these weekly meetings with Susan and the managers, and so she would go over, and so I have these calendars, I'm going to show them to you. She would actually go over how much we made every night. And so it became really important to me. It was like a business thing. So it wasn't just like, oh, cool, I'm booking these bands, but it was really like, this is the calendar. It was based off of Claudia's system, because I have one of hers here, where she had these engagement calendars, and we'd write down the bands that we booked or whatever the performances. And then I actually wrote in red ink how much money we made every night. And so I was really trying to make sure DC Space stayed in business, because there was, you know, the way the agreement was with that building was they had to maintain the building. The owner didn't maintain the building. So all those broken toilets or holes in the wall, we were always fixing, like Claudia was describing.
Can I interrupt and ask the question I asked Claudia? Was there any aesthetic decisions, or was it more just like filling time?
So it was, well, as you can see, and this is even funnier when you said it on this calendar. So just going back, wait, let me just go back a little bit. I'm talking about the artists who drew these calendars. So Vivian was hired because I was like, I'm not doing this. I can't draw these calendars. That's a Vivian calendar, 88 Vivian. And it's really funny because they get more and more illegible, which I thought was kind of funny, because it's sort of like, I was just thinking about it. What does that mean? It just means just come to DC Space and find out what it is, you know? Why do you need to know what it is you're going to go see? I mean, it's so funny. I mean, Susan Morrell, like Claudia said, she really was lenient, and really, she knew it was an important place. She knew that it was an important venue and a release for so many artists to be here. And again, you know, just trying to make sure that it kept on operating. I remember one time, I think Dot, you called me, and there was some party that was scheduled and they didn't even show up. It was like a Friday or Saturday, and I felt so bad because I realized, you know, the bartenders, that's how they make their ends meet too. You know, it was like a huge, like Claudia said, a family, and you were always trying to make sure everything, you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's, making sure everything worked for the artist, the performer, for the people who worked there. Okay, the other thing that happened near the end, which I wish I had these photos, but you guys remember the dry erase board in the bar? I took photos of every single one of them, and then I put them in this box. I hate to blame Bill Worrell, but I gave Bill this, like, this is the really important box of stuff you got to keep. Gave it to him. He doesn't know where it is. I'm hoping one day he finds it. But in that box is this little envelope of the photos of all the calendars people drew. And I remember the quote unquote worst one was the one that the guy drew of an abortion. Which was, you know, like the placenta, and every day in the placenta, there was like a date for, I don't understand how it was. Something like, or maybe it was just a baby being born. I have no idea, but it was like the placenta, and every single date was within this placenta and umbilical cord. So it sat there for the entire month because they're like, no, we must leave it. I love that. That's great. And then this is Bess Powell. She gets a little bit more like clear. You can see dates. 1991. So I was like Claudia. I learned from Claudia, obviously. I really did. If I felt, even you talk to somebody, you listen to something, and I was like, I don't really like this. But that's okay, because they actually really seem like they really want to play here, and they really want to do something. They really want to make something happen. They had friends. They wanted something to happen, whatever that was. And you felt it. You even talked to them on the phone. If you talked to this band on the phone, you could tell, or the people. So you just made it, you know, yeah, it's got to happen. And Cynthia, so I kind of went crazy because I was, yeah.
I'm interrupting you. I want everybody to acknowledge I'm interrupting you in your narrative here to sort of try to wrap this up. I apologize for the time, but I'm quoting Cynthia from this morning on Facebook. And I thought this might be a nice way to wrap this up, and you can just click through those flyers if you don't mind. So this is what you posted this morning, and I just thought you should elaborate a little bit, and then we can end. But so on Facebook this morning, what an amazing place DC Space was, a true confluence of creative minds and intense energy, and in some ways paved the way for so many other performance and art spaces. Let's look at DC Space and other places that were pushing the creative envelope in DC during that time and contemplate what were the elements that made it so great. But then what can be the elements today to use to make the same explosion? So that's actually my question to you or anyone. Something for people to contemplate about how this might live today. The end.